Hello, and welcome back to this, our 30-second live stream of Ancient Egypt and the Bible, where we take your questions on the ancient world. Now, tonight, this is the last live stream of 2021, and boy, it was a roller coaster year, to say the least. So, again, our live streams are pretty much the same as they always are, which is we take your questions. Super chats have priority. Then, if you are just asking a question and you're not doing a super chat, please put Q, capital Q, and a colon in front of the question so I know that it's addressed to me, as opposed to being addressed to somebody else in the live chat. I also ask that you post your question only once. If it's a non-super chat, that way I can tell what I've answered and what I haven't, because I will often scan through the live chat looking for non-super chats to answer. Also, we also ask that if you do a question about, say, a verse in the Bible or a foreign word, we ask that you give us some context. So let us know the Bible, the book and the chapter and the verse number, or if it's a word, what you think the word is supposed to mean and what language it comes from. So, with all that said, let's get into this, our last live stream for 2021. So, we'll start with a couple of non-super chats, because those are always fun. And our first one comes from Chow Yi. Dr. Falk, what is your advice for a medical doctor who's interested in entering archaeology? Okay, well, I got a few pieces of advice, actually. First of all, the practice of medicine is very, very different than, say, the practice of archaeology. It's different in the respect that you're not working on patients. It's not the practice of being a doctor. It's more you are a doctor doing research. So it's very, very research focused. So anything that you do in archaeology is almost going to be entirely devoted to research. So that is very much going to change, say, your perspective. Now, I think one of the great things about archaeology is that it can, say, interface so easily with, say, medical fields, especially if you're doing stuff like mummies. I mean, mummies and medicine almost go hand in glove, because there's a lot of medical doctors who do have an interest in archaeology. In order to be qualified to do a dig, you generally need a terminal degree, whereas to be a medical doctor, that's not necessarily a terminal degree. So it is more along the lines of, say, doing a medical doctor and then going on for your PhD beyond that. So that's really sort of going to be the difference between, say, the practice of medicine and more archaeology. A lot more bookwork than, say, even the practice of medicine. So, I mean, in theory, medicine's supposed to be a lot of reading too. Reality, it's kind of like law. Most doctors and lawyers don't actually pick up a book after they graduate. Archaeology, it's all about reading. It's all about scholarship. So, yeah, you have to be a really voracious reader to really do well in archaeology or any scholarly field, because it is scholarship. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Great question. I hope that helped. Okay. The next question is from Inavati. Is it really the last live stream of 2021? Could be. Yes, it is really the last live stream of 2021. I'm not going to do one tomorrow. I've got to have some time to myself. My wife jealously covets my time, so absolutely, this is the last live stream of 2021. But with that said, Mr. Empty Conjecture might be making future appearances. We'll see. We'll see about that. Um, I mean, I feel like I've been upstaged by a sock puppet, but Evie, people love Mr. Empty Conjecture, I have to say. And even I have a soft spot for Mr. Empty Conjecture. So, thank you for the comment. It's very, it made me laugh. Okay. And the third question from Devon, Canada. I have heard many say nations are a modern construct. What is your take on this? Um, no, I don't think nationhood is, say, a modern construct. Um, there is definitely national identity in the ancient world. Sometimes it was more tied with ethnicity, but it was there. Nationhood really sort of developed out of resource management, out of agriculture. So I don't think it's a modern construct, but it is a construct that is born out of civilization, as opposed to being just, say, um, just something that was cobbled in, say, the modern era, or even in the postmodern or pre-modern Europe. I think there's definitely ties and ideas of, even, say, the state. Even in going back to Roman times, we have this idea. We have ideas of kingship, and that's definitely something that's of national significance, and ideas of nation building. So I don't think it's a modern construct, but I can see how, say, the modern nation state is different than, say, ancient nations as well. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. I hope that answered it. So now I think we're going to move on to the super chats, because we actually have several already. Loading it here. Throw up Twidget. Okay, here we go. Now I just want to make sure I caught them. Okay, we got them all. Our first super chat of the night comes from Austin McMahon for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on how Yahweh's unique attributes, for example, the three omnis, were communicated to the ancient Near Eastern audience of the Hebrew Bible? Okay. Well, for those who don't know, the three omnis are the ideas of that the Greeks attributed to the idea of God. God had to be omniscient, all-knowing, omnibenevolent, all good, and omnipotent, all powerful. Okay? These are the three classical attributes of God that apply to theism. Now, there are some other omnis that are not attributed to, say, theism, like what was it called now? Everywhere at once. Omnipresence. Yeah, omnipresence. Omnipresence is not an attribute of, say, classical theism. And that's because omnipresence is tied to more pantheistic concepts of deity. So when it comes to the Bible, many with the during the Hellenistic period, a lot of, say, classical writers recognize that Yahweh sort of fit that classic mode of theism. So, and that's because we do see that Yahweh was omnipotent enough to create the cosmos, to create the universe. He was omniscient enough to know the future. Like, for example, in Isaiah, it's said that he is the God who can predict the future. There will come a king, Cyrus, who will liberate and repatriate the Jewish people. Okay, so you got that. The foretelling of the future. That's the sign of omniscience. That's manifest in, say, the scriptures. As far as let's see, we've covered omnipotent, we covered omniscient, omnibenevolent. Omnibenevolent is he is a God that does good. He doesn't do evil. He's not the author of evil. So we see in, say, the scriptures where he blesses his people. He blesses those who are who do according to what is righteous or good. He values what is good. So you do see that, and he, acting as judge. The other thing is that he acts as judge. We see that God as judge is a manifestation of his holiness and thus his goodness. So these are the ways that Yahweh's unique attributes were communicated to a more ancient Near Eastern audience, and that's through the actual practice of what God's attributes were. His power to create, his knowledge of the future, and his goodness as a judge. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that answered your question. Okay. Catafact3 for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. What's your favorite anime and manga? Okay. Well, my favorite anime is Mobile Suit Gundam. Particularly, there was one in particular that always escapes my mind. That's just absolutely unbelievably good. War in the Pocket was terrific. I mean, I did really like War in the Pocket. Let's see here. But there was a recent one, too, that is just excellent. My hard drive fires up here. Be just a moment. As far as manga, I've actually have very, very broad tastes in manga. Oh, here we go. Okay. Thunderbolt. Mobile Suit Gundam Thunderbolt was excellent. I mean, really, really excellent. I really enjoyed Thunderbolt. I thought it tackled some really, really interesting ethical issues as well, such as how high is how much of a cost do we lay on our soldiers when we go to war? So I mean, I think there's it was wonderfully animated, beautifully animated, great soundtrack, and it just sort of tugged on your heartstrings like Gundam always does. Now, as far as manga goes, Your Lie in April. Oh, that was heartbreaking. That was absolutely heartbreaking. I loved it. I absolutely loved Your Lie in April. But boy, oh boy, was it made me cry. Musician gives up hope as an artist. He meets this girl who really encourages him to go with his talents. He's extraordinarily talented at the piano. And she's terminally ill. And the manga takes you from the earliest days of them meeting up to the point where he's visiting her tomb, her grave. So absolutely heart-wrenching. But it was one of the best manga I've read in recent memory. So those are two great ones right there. Okay, so thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Avraham Ben Hayim for 4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I don't see a question there, but if you want to ask a question or it somehow didn't get included, please put it down and we'll try to answer it. But other than that, thank you very much for the contribution. It does help this channel. We are very, very much dependent on your support to keep going on this channel. So we appreciate every ounce of support we get. So thank you very much for the super chat. Wonderful, wonderful at this time of year. Okay, I see another super chat here by, please forgive me if I sort of butcher your last name. Well, actually, I won't even try. Andrew, for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. How was human sacrifice practiced in Canaan? Children. That's how it was practiced. It was practiced upon young children. Did parents volunteer their kids to be sacrificed? Yes, frequently. Or did the army decide who was to be sacrificed? It really depends on the circumstances of the child sacrifice. Now, we see child sacrifices in sort of two manifestations. We see what we call an economically driven sacrifice, and then more of then finally a last ditch, attempt. For example, we find, for example, at like the Tophet at Carthage. Carthage had a Tophet, and a Tophet is a place where child sacrifice was done. At the Tophet at Carthage, there is this sort of interesting sort of paradox. Early on, the Tophet at Carthage, the earliest remains at Carthage were basically faunal remains like deer, goats, cattle, animal remains. We also know that those early graves of that period, there was lots of malnutrition. So they were sacrificing stuff that they more or less either were growing or hunting. But later on, as the people of Carthage became more prosperous, it was only then they started doing child sacrifice. So one of the conclusions that archaeologists draw from this is that child sacrifice is a means to secure one's socio-economic prosperity. Okay? So that's one kind of sacrifice, which is basically you're sacrificing a child in exchange for your future prosperity. So that was common in the ancient world. The other kind of sacrifice was, for example, when a city was under siege. A parent would sometimes, or often even, sacrifice a child to appeal to the gods to save them from this invading army. We do have reliefs from one of these reliefs was at the Ramesseum, where Ramses is laying siege to a city, probably Gaza, and it shows the chief or king of Gaza holding a child, his son, and sacrificing it as an appeal to the gods to save them from the invading Egyptian army. So we do see this in Egyptian records where they will invade, say Canaan, and the local city-states, the king's son will end up being sacrificed to try to save the entire city. So that's how the sort of sacrifices were determined. It does seem that it was a decision by the parents, whichever case it was, whether it was for desperation or whether it was for prosperity. So it was a decision of the parents. The army didn't decide, so it wasn't, say, a collective state that decided. It was the individual parent himself. And it's usually done by more or less by knife, by knife blade. So that's typically how the human sacrifice was practiced. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered your question. Interesting question. Okay. Tom Wamchick for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Scripture depicts Canaanites, Amalekites, Sodom and Gomorrah as profoundly debauched and wicked. Did ancient Egyptians see them this way? Wow. In a sense, yes. In a sense. They saw other nations, the Egyptians saw their other nations as sort of wretched and vile. They would see, say, Canaanites as sort of forces of chaos. They did not have a high opinion of their neighbors. Okay, Egyptians had a very, very low opinion of neighboring nations. Whether it was Levantines, whether it was Cushites and Nubians, or whether it was Libyans. They saw them as savages. They saw them as less cultured, less in every regard, almost subhuman. Now, interestingly enough, they didn't always treat individuals from those cultures that way, but collectively as the culture, they definitely had a very, very low view of, say, those cultures. So low, in fact, that in diplomatic correspondence, Egypt doesn't, when it sends out a letter, it doesn't refer to those other nations by the term king. So the ruler of those other nations would not be called, say, the king of Hatzor. He would be called the chief of Hatzor. He would be called, say, like, for example, the king of Salem. The Egyptians would call him the chief of Salem. And that's because they did not consider those civilizations to be equals. Now, there were some exceptions to this. The big empires, the Egyptians did sort of perceive as brothers. So, say, after the Hittite treaty was signed, it would be the king of Egypt would say, "My brother, the king of Hatti," or Babylon, "My brother, the king of Babylon." So for the great empires, there was seen to be this co-equal relationship. But yeah, the Levantine sort of city-states were seen as more savage. I wouldn't say necessarily debauched or wicked, but definitely forces of chaos, vile. Not a good thing. You didn't want a lot of them in your country, which is why they also had border controls too. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. It is very, very true that the Egyptians were very xenophobic. They were extremely xenophobic, and that just seems to be a part of Egyptian culture, to the extent that native Egyptians wouldn't even eat with, say, Levantine Semites or Nubians or Libyans. So, they would have their table, the foreigners would have their table. So that's an ugly side of ancient Egypt, but it is also, a something we have to face as well. Not everything Egypt did was nice. So, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Hey. John Pay for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I am currently a college freshman who is a recent born again. Well, welcome to the kingdom, brother. It's good to have you. Thank you very much for your helping me strengthen my faith and decision to pursue theology. Well, I'm glad you're doing that. Just, if you're pursuing theology as, say, an academic study, one piece of advice I will give you is pursue your studies as an act of worship. For me, it made all the difference. it really made all the difference for me to pursue my theological studies as an act of worship. One of the things about studying theology is things can get very mechanical, very rote. It can seem very spiritually dry at times, but by doing it as an act of worship, you find that this sort of motivates you in a very interesting way that you wouldn't have anticipated. And ultimately, when you then come back to the study of theology after you finish your college, you do sort of discover at that point that every time you open the scriptures, now you're finding something new and exciting. So, I'm glad we were able to help. Praise the Lord for that, and thank you very much for the super chat. We very much appreciate it, and best of luck in college. It's hard, but it's worth it. Finding Truth for 199. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Did you watch the Jonathan Sheffield and CJ Cox versus Josh Bowen and Maggie Bryson debate? Thoughts? Ooh. Ooh. My thoughts on this. Yeah. Wow. I want to be diplomatic here. I want to be diplomatic because I think each participant did their level best. Okay. I think all four participants did their level best. But they also didn't show a unified front, to be very honest. I mean, you had all four participants were throwing each other under the bus. Whether or not they knew it is another matter. You had Maggie contradicting Josh. You had CJ contradicting Sheffield. You had, they were. It was not a cohesive debate. And I actually don't think it was a very good debate, honestly. It really sort of didn't get to some critical issues that we find in Exodus, in the Exodus debate. So I do think that there were a lot of problems with the debate. I don't think it was a terribly good debate. It was very clear that four non-subject matter experts were debating this. And what we had here is the result of, and frankly, when you get more than two people in a debate, it turns into a pig's breakfast pretty fast. And again, this is not a criticism of any one of these debaters. It's not a criticism of any one of these debaters. But when you have more than two people on a debate stage, it turns into a furball. It gets disorganized. Unless you got really real strict time, and that almost never happens in a debate like that. And I saw in this debate that it turned into complete chaos very fast. I mean, you even had the occasional profanity being thrown off, and this doesn't have. Some of the debaters didn't understand the issues. Some of the debaters were using tactics that that say a brighter debater would have picked up on and exploited. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in this debate. A lot of room for improvement. So, and that's probably all I'm going to say about that. I don't plan on reviewing it, although you never know with the popcorn. The popcorn has a mind of its own. But I'm not planning on reviewing it per se. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and those are my superficial thoughts here. Okay. Andrew again for $5. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate that. Wow. Wonderful. And I do see a question here, and we'll take that question right underneath it. Okay. What is the minimum level of tech necessary to build a pyramid? Early Bronze Age tech. The Egyptians had wheels and iron, not at the time of the building of the pyramids. Aztecs built pyramids without wheels and iron. Yes, they did. And so did the Egyptians. Okay? The Egyptians did not have the wheel until around 1666 BC. That's long after the pyramids, which were built starting around 2600 BC. Okay? Iron really was not a big metal. They had some meteoritic iron, but it was really rare. Iron itself was not actually commonly used in Egypt until roughly around 1000 BC. Okay? So, when the pyramids were built, they had neither wheels nor iron. But what they did have was boats. And they had bronze. And a lot of stuff, you could carve an awful lot of stuff with bronze tools. We find it, for example, at quarries, the remnants of bronze tools. We find the remains of, say, holes that were used to lift blocks by sledge out of the quarry. The annual inundation allowed blocks to be placed upon boats and almost literally floated almost directly to the pyramid itself. So a lot of pyramid construction involved the use of boats. So you really don't actually need that high of technology to build a pyramid. It's not that necessary. And we even see in say, the uncompleted pyramids, how they sort of did it. Which was, they didn't actually smooth out the stones all that evenly when they started stacking them. You know, some of these stones were only half finished when they started stacking. It's only after they get them in place that they sort of smooth everything out. We see an example of such a construction. There's a Queen's Pyramid that shows this at in front of the Pyramid of Khufu. But we also find this too, this technique being used and continued on into, say, the Middle and New Kingdom as well. There's an unfinished column at Karnak Temple, and you'd think, you know, they smoothed out all the stones and then piled to exact measurements and then piled them on one by one. But that's not how they did it. That's not how they did it at all. They had these rough stones that they just put on top of one another, and they placed it first. And then after they stacked the whole column, they then took off all the rough edges and smoothed it off. It's really sort of counterintuitive to the way we build things today. But it is how they did it back then. So it's really interesting to see these sort of examples where the Egyptians didn't quite finish their work, because that tells us how they actually went about building these things. So anyway, thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciate it. And thank you for that question, too. It was a very interesting question. Okay. Avraham Benhaim for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. I think your work is incredible. Well, thank you very much. I'm enjoying your channel. Wonderful. We try to make our channel both educational and entertaining. We think learning should be fun. We think learning should be exciting. We love to learn. I mean, one of the things, I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself a perpetual student. Somebody who's always learning. I've always got more to learn. I think learning is one of the most exciting things I do in a day. It's if I learn something, I'm just like, I'm happy. I'm happy at that point. So I want to share that excitement with everyone else by making education interesting. Okay, and he goes on, and you go on. Do we see any Egyptian pottery when Israel took over in Canaan? And if not, why not? Well, not really. We do find some Egyptian pottery shards, but we only find those typically in garrison towns. Okay. Now, what's a garrison town? A garrison town is basically a little town that the Egyptians set up as, say, a monitoring station. It might have a small contingent of soldiers. The largest garrison towns were only about 1,000 people. Yeah, and only half of those would be soldiers. So garrison towns were not big. Some of these garrison towns only had a couple hundred people, if that. Some of these garrison towns were really tiny. So where we do see Egyptian pottery from these archaeological digs from garrison towns, it's generally pottery that's been imported, from Egypt into Canaan. However, we don't see a lot of it, and part of the reason is because one of the purposes of the garrison towns was to provide exports, not import things. So generally what we see is pottery being made to store wine and olive oil that are then exported to Egypt. So even at garrison towns, the local pottery traditions prevail. Amphora, large wine jugs, these are the pots we do find in Canaan, even in largely Egyptian dominated garrison towns. And as I said, it's because the whole reason for Egyptian hegemony is to shore up their economy, basically to keep the supply of goods and stuff that makes life nice coming back into Egypt. So this is what we generally find in Canaan. Now, with that said, we do find examples of Egyptian pottery in Canaan. It's just sort of outnumbered by more local Canaanite pottery. So, anyway, thank you very much for the question. Great question. Very interesting. And I very much appreciate the super chat. Okay, and another one. Avraham Benheim again. Thank you very much. $1.99. Very much appreciated. Do we find any Israelite artifact in Canaan in late Bronze Age? That is a very interesting question. Late Bronze Age, roughly around 1150, roughly, we do start seeing a transition in faunal remains in the Judean foothills. And it's only, say, 50 years after that where we start finding Israelite pottery. Now, one of the things about Israelite pottery is it tends to be highly burnished. Okay? You look at Canaanite pottery, it's very rough. Or you look at Philistine bichromeware, where you have the black and the red decorations on more whitish pottery. You do see that there's a stylistic difference between Canaanite, Philistine, and, say, Israelite pottery. As I said, Israelite pottery tends to has a burnished surface. There does seem to be a pottery style that takes place at Israelite settlements after the occupation, after they start coming into their inheritance. It does not seem to come, say, prior to that. So it's really at the end of the late Bronze Age where we do start finding Israelite artifacts in Canaan. But it is mostly pottery remains. And it's part of it is that when they arrive in Canaan, they're more or less taking over Canaanite cities. They're more or less taking over. They're basically moving into people's houses, using Canaanite houses, tending to Canaanite vineyards, eating from Canaanite gardens, using Canaanite pottery, and their Canaanite dishes. Essentially, they're using what the Canaanites had already made. So this creates a kind of a blurred line here between what the Israelites took from the Canaanites for their own use, and then later started having to make themselves. So that's why we sort of see this line demarcation between the Canaanite and Israelite more blurry than we would expect. It's also why we start seeing, that transition in faunal remains where, Canaanites are eating pig and donkey and nasty stuff, to say a more kosher meal like goat and sheep. So, and that happens pretty much about 50-ish years, and 50 is here really, it could be, I mean, plus or minus 50 as well. So, it could be as early as 1200, it could be as late as 1100 too, for this transition of faunal remains. But with that said, however, that transition does happen. And it does seem to be an artifact of Israelite culture. And then, as I say, after that, you then get the Israelite wear. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, another one from Abraham Ben Hayam. Thank you very much for $4.99. Okay. Did you watch Kip on Myth Vision with Josh critiquing one of your Q&A vids? And if so, what did you think? Oh, they're going to find out what I think. I mean, look. They strawman me. They quote mined me. It's like, okay, if that's the level of your critique, so what? You know? They chose my my live stream number 30 as a source of critique. Well, all these live streams are essentially, there's no prep involved. There's no prep. I mean, I have no idea what the question is going to be. No idea. No idea what questions I'm going to get hit with on any live stream. There's no preparation. It's all off the top of my head. It's not like I'm not going to make mistakes doing this. But at the same time, too, I'm not going to stake my reputation on something that I answer off the cuff. And it seems even silly to even critique it on that level. It's like it's almost what accountants and lawyers call party wisdom. It's party wisdom. It's essentially that you're sharing your knowledge in an informal manner, and it's not being held against you because it is informal. With that said, however, like for example, their critique of, say, Deuteronomy 32, I was answering a very, very specific question, and I was not about to go into all the gory details of text criticism at that point because it wasn't relevant to the question. So they're expecting me to answer a question I wasn't answering. So it's like, well, that's then a straw man. That's a classic straw man. So it's like, okay. And they've done this before. This is classic Kip. Classic Kip. So, yeah. I think his critiques are a joke. They're a joke. So anyway, that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, RG Strategy for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on the recent CT scan of King Amenemhotep I? Also, happy 2022, everyone. Well, happy New Year to you also. I think this is great. This is actually an extension of technology that's been worked on for about, I'd say about 10 years. 10 years. And it actually started off with scrolls, particularly scrolls that couldn't be unrolled. For example, they found at Pompeii these charred scrolls. They're essentially papyrus or parchment scrolls that went through the volcanic eruption, and they're just more or less now carbon. They're highly carbonized. Now you can't unroll them. because they're brittle and they'll fall apart. But what some researchers discovered is if you X-ray them, you can still read the printing on them. The question is, how do you make sense of that as a rolled object? Well, computers can be used to sort of figure out and unroll it virtually. So this CT scan of King Amenhotep I is essentially an application of that technology, just done a lot bigger, on a whole mummy instead of just a little scroll. I think this is fantastic. I would love to be able to say, take some of these cartonnage like face masks that we find from, say, the 2nd and 3rd centuries BC, do that sort of scanning, read the text on the object that are hidden underneath in the cartonnage. And cartonnage is basically paper mache done with papyrus. So if you could read those papyrus without unwrapping it, you both get to have the text and keep the artifact intact. So wonderful technology. Great. I'm glad they're doing it, and I'm glad they're doing it on larger items too. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and Happy New Year. Okay. Mike Taigi for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. You're my hero. I appreciate you. Thanks for being you. Well, I appreciate the sentiment, but let's not take that too far. I'm nobody's hero. I just do what the Lord calls me to do. I've started an apologetic and evangelism team at my church. Wonderful. Great to hear. One thing I've been seeing is young Earth, old Earth questions. Any input resources? Okay. I don't have any resources for you on this. I don't even have any recommendations on this. It is an issue. It is an issue. I have some issues with both sides of this. Frankly, I have issues with every side of this debate, whether it's old Earth, young Earth, evolution, punctuated equilibrium, panspermia, ancient aliens. It doesn't matter what side you take on origins. I think there's issues with all of them. All of them have issues. Now, with that said, I think there are some, for, say, the churchmen that are more problematic than others. For example, while I doubt evolution on scientific grounds, okay, I have my reasons for this, and I'm not about to divulge them, but I have scientific reasons for being skeptical of evolution. I have exegetical and expository reasons for doubting young Earth creationism. So I don't place myself in any of these categories. As a result, though, too, I would also say, too, that young Earth, say, creationism also has a hermeneutic attached to it that can also be very, very problematic in other ways. Like, for example, say, the dating of the Exodus. The same hermeneutic that's used to date young Earth creationism is also used to date, say, a early Exodus. So, and I find that deeply concerning, deeply problematic because of what it does to the other texts of Scripture, which is it compromises those readings. So unfortunately, I don't have a resource for you at this time. As I say, I'm still working through this myself. But I'm really, really encouraged by the fact that you've started an apologetics and evangelism team at your church. I think that's absolutely wonderful. Praise the Lord for that. And it's nice to see some fruit come out of our ministry too. So very much appreciate the super chat. Very much appreciate the comment and the question. Praise the Lord. Thank you very much. Okay, Andrew gave another $5. Well, thank you. And I see a question under that as well. So, why are pyramids more well known as ancient structures than ziggurats? Okay, I think a couple reasons. I think my wife says they stick out bigger. She's right. She is right. The pyramids were a lot larger than ziggurats. Even, for example, say the first pyramid in Egypt. We have to remember, like, the step pyramid of King Zoser was the tallest man-made structure built on planet Earth for nearly 300 years. It's only when Khufu's pyramid or Senefru's pyramids come along that's overturned. But for nearly 300 years, he's the tallest. That's the tallest object on planet Earth. Most of the ziggurats at that point had already been made. You know, ziggurats were a lot smaller. So that's one reason I think that they are less known than, say, the pyramids. The other thing about ziggurats too is that they don't have any internal structure to them. They're just more or less a pile of mud brick with a little sort of house on top. There's no tunnel structure underneath. There's no tomb in them. There's nothing more than, say, the surface of a ziggurat. It's more or less a worship platform. It's a platform where priests would go up and then do their rituals in sort of analogical kind of ways. And I don't think that sort of kindles the imagination of the Western mind in the same way that pyramids do. I mean, let's face it. You go to the pyramids at Giza and you just go, my neck hurts looking up at them. You know, that's sort of that's sort of the pyramid experience. You can go inside a pyramid. You can see a sarcophagus in a pyramid. You know, there's actually and then you got surrounding these pyramids, you got mastabas full of colorful reliefs. There's a lot to see around a pyramid. If you're lucky enough to go to a ziggurat when the nation is not in a state of war, you see a pile of mud brick. You're not even allowed to climb it. See that little house up there? That's sort of the temple-ish place. Not a big temple, it's just a sort of little tiny hut on top. And you go, okay, is it time for lunch yet? Yeah, so that's sort of more your reaction when you go to ziggurats. So it is a matter of scale. It is a matter of how much more there is to pyramids than there is to ziggurats. So I think that's why pyramids are more well known. So anyway, thank you very much for the question and the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Linguist Ammo for $5. Thank you very much. Good to see you, friend. The Mana Machine. Oh, yes. I cried of laughter when I heard that, but I just want to wish you guys a Happy New Year. Well, thank you very much. We are re-editing that video, so we are going to repost it when it is edited. We are taking out all the original footage, pretty much, but we do also want to retain all the ideas as well. So we are being very careful with the edit, and we are making sure that at least the idea of the Mana Machine is back, is in the edit, even if we can't use the original footage. It's just unfortunate that A&E Entertainment is so litigious about its video properties that it will essentially squelch critique, commentary, and parody. So, you know, we want to work within the rules of YouTube. We want to work within the rules of copyright, but we also don't want to be subject to copy fraud either. And copy fraud is a very important issue, and copy fraud is essentially, you know, asserting your copyright when you're not entitled to do so. And we do find copy fraud becoming a growing problem as people are less educated about issues of copyright and what is allowed. So anyway, as I said, we are editing that right now. Hopefully we'll get out Monday. Can't promise it, but we're going to try to get it out by Monday. So Anyway, want to wish you also a happy new year, and thank you very much. And it was a lot of fun to make that video. I really enjoyed it. So thank you very much. Okay, Sentinel Apologetics for $10 Australian. Well, thank you very much. Good to see you, Rob. Happy New Year, Popcorn King. Thank you for all that you've done this year and for our awesome friendship. Absolutely. Praise the Lord. I really value our friendship. That's one of the things that's really sort of surprised me out of the YouTube channel is all the new friends I've made. It's yeah, I've made a lot of new enemies, but I've also made a lot of new friends. And I thank God for every new friend I've gotten on this channel. It's been wonderful. And it's been really encouraging, even in some of the more dark times. And we have gone through some dark times on this channel. So, being able to have good friends that will pray for you and support you is just a blessing. It's absolutely a blessing. So, but very much appreciate your friendship. The Scotch must flow. Absolutely, the Scotch must flow. Yes, I definitely agree. I'm not having any Scotch right now. I just got water and coffee here, but I would like a Scotch. And then you finally add, I'll be releasing my Saucy Star of Bethlehem video in 12 hours. Well, definitely go check out Sentinel Apologetics, his channel, and watch his Saucy Star of Bethlehem video. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and thank you for your friendship and your support. This has been a real ride, and Lord willing, we'll continue to do this again in 2022. Thank you very much. Hey. JD Freeze. Comment. See here. JD Freeze for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. I hope you had a very Merry Christmas. It was snowing. I'm not a big fan of snow. I mean, we got a lot of snow. More than I've seen in probably 30 years here. I'm curious how the Israelites understood prophets. Passages like 1 Kings 22 seem to suggest that there was a class of prophets not necessarily sent by God. Yes. That is true. You had essentially two kinds of prophets in, say, Israel. You had the professional prophet. Now, what's the professional prophet? This is somebody who went through and apprenticed at the school of the prophets, like you see in 1 Kings 22. Many prophets were essentially, given an apprenticeship as a child. And that apprenticeship, was to train them in the way of being a prophet, should God ever use them. And if God never did use them, what happened to these prophets is they supported other prophets. Cooked their food, took care of their children while they're off prophesying, do, say, the mundane tasks. So, you did have this whole sort of class of service prophets as well. And then, of course, there's the other type of prophet who had sort of the unique calling from God, who didn't actually apprentice as a prophet, but were just called to do so. For example, the examples are Ezra and Nehemiah are both examples of those kind of prophets. They had other professions that they practiced, prior to, becoming and being called to be a prophet. We have the ones that are called to be prophets, as opposed to going to a prophetic school. You do see, like, for example, the fig knockers, the wine tasters, people who had other professions beside that. Now, that said, one could still go to the prophetic school and still become a legitimate prophet. God can still choose somebody from the prophetic school. So just because you went to the school of the prophets didn't mean you would become a voice of God prophet, but it didn't exclude you either. It's a little bit like seminary in a way. Just because you go to seminary doesn't mean you're going to become a pastor. You could end up being something else, like a Egyptologist, or you could end up being a vice president at a Fortune 500 company. Many of the students that I went to school with at Trinity International University, when I did my Master of Divinity, a lot of them became pastors, but a lot of them did other things. A lot of them went into the corporate world and became executives. So, because, frankly, doing that gave them life skills that very much equipped them to excel in the corporate world. So, education can help, and it even could help back then, but it wasn't a guarantee, like it never is. So, anyway, there does seem to be these two classes of prophets, or two ways that prophets came to serve God. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, let's see what we got here. Avraham Benhaim for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Are there any good Orthodox Jewish scholars that you would recommend when it comes to the Exodus and the conquest of Canaan? Yes, there is one. Joshua Berman. Excellent Orthodox Jewish scholar. Very, very good view, strong view on the Exodus and the conquest of Canaan. He is an excellent Orthodox Jewish scholar, and personally, he's a friend of mine too. So, but he's very good, exceptionally good. He's also very good on, say, the documentary hypothesis as well. His book is absolutely fantastic. He just sort of dismantles the documentary hypothesis in that book. So, excellent scholar, and he's an Orthodox Jew. So, anyway, I hope that answers the question. That's the one that immediately pops to my brain. Joshua Berman. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Pistis Production for HNL is, I'm not sure what that currency is, but it's 125 of that. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, Dr. Falk. Hope you and your family are doing okay in every possible way. Thanks for the good content. We keep learning a ton. Happy New Year. Well, Happy New Year to you too. Again, we love doing content. Oh, Honduran. Okay. Well, thank you. It's nice to see people from other countries join the channel, because it does show that we don't just appeal to just North Americans. So, Central America, South America, we've had people from Southeast Asia who join our channel at times. So it's really encouraging to see that this has a really broad appeal. But we do love making content. Content is what we enjoy doing. So we are hoping to do some more exciting stuff in the new year. And you can look forward to more videos on various topics. So, thank you very much for the encouragement. We do really appreciate it, and thank you very much for the super chat. God bless you. Hey. Matthew Craig for £5 British. Thank you very much. My bro Andrew is a history eighth. Oh, sorry, history. Oh, Bachelor of Theology. Um, uh, got him your book for Christmas. He asked me for what to read next list. Your thoughts? He's taking notes on the biblio. Okay. On the bibliography, I would imagine. Well, there's been some good books. I have to admit, on my reading list now, I finally got the 5 Views of the on the Exodus book that was edited by Mark Jansen. I'm still reading it myself. I'm also going to give a little pitch to a book I just got that was published by one of my friends here. And it might be a little technical. I haven't actually, gotten much into it. But Paul J. Lawrence, Egg Whites or Turnips, Archaeology and Bible Translation. One of the things that Paul Lawrence is he's a Bible translator. He's a Bible translator that works for, I believe, Wycliffe, and he's also an Assyriologist. He's a Assyriologist. He's done some archaeology, and when he does his Bible translations, he tries to bring the archaeology into this. Now, he's written this interesting little book that that basically goes into the various issues that biblical archaeology has spoken to when it comes to, say, more modern translations. So, fascinating little book. It's he just published it last year, so it's a really new book. So that's sort of on my next reading list. But there's other things too. The big, if you want a big sort of primer on Bible study, or sorry, the Old Testament from a more say conservative view, I would also recommend Behind the Scenes of the Old Testament. I think it's by Baker Books. So that one's also very good. There's been a lot of good books that have come out in recent years. So it's almost like, well, where do you begin to choose? So anyway, that's my off the top of my head thoughts on this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. And one last super chat here from Abraham Benheim for $4.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you so much for answering my questions. My pleasure. That's what we love to do. Looking forward to continue learning from you. L'chaim, Dr. Falk. Well, l'chaim to you too. Very much appreciated. It's really a pleasure to answer your questions. Again, we don't get everything perfect. We don't try to get everything perfect. If we understand that if we try to get everything perfect, that we'll never get anything out there. We think there's so much content that deserves to be out there, that we sometimes do sacrifice quantity quality for quantity, but we also think too that the quantity also has to be out there, that people, it really surprised me when I started on the YouTube that nobody had filled this niche, to be honest. Ancient Egypt in the Bible, it seems intuitive. You have the Exodus, you have, say, Shoshank the First, you have Hophre, you have Jesus, his fleeing to Egypt. You have Egypt in prophecy. You have Egypt in the patriarchs. Abraham meets with Pharaoh. You have all these interactions between the Bible and Egypt. and yet nobody's focusing on it. Nobody is doing videos, at least no videos of quality on this. So there's this huge backlog of information, and we just saw this backlog just mount and mount and mount. It's like, wait, well, we really do need to start, at least bringing it out there so in a way that normal people can understand this, and to be honest, even laugh. Some of this stuff is pretty funny. So we wanted to make this so that people didn't feel like they were drinking out of a fire hose. Because when you do get a backlog of information like this, it's really tempting to just do the information dump. And people eyes glaze over and go, I didn't understand half of that. So one of the things we do is we keep these videos exceptionally short. Our typical format. For those relatively new to my channel here, who might not know me as well as some of my longtime viewers, our videos are typically very short, less than 20 minutes. We do that intentionally because we know that the attention span fades after pretty much 20 minutes. Now, we make an exception here for popcorn videos, but that's because popcorn videos are special, and they're almost like a running gag reel sometimes, to be honest, as you hear some of the things that come out of people's mouths. But our typical our core content teaching videos are 20 minutes or less. We don't give you a lot of background information. What we do is we discuss the issue, discuss as much as is relevant, and then we get out. So we keep things really, really brief. Sometimes too brief, to be very honest. Sometimes the brevity hurts us because people think, oh, well, you didn't cover that issue in a competent way. Well, we did as best as we could for the brevity that we were looking at, for the target length. Now, we understand that some topics may take longer to do than others. And in those cases, we tend to break them up into series. Like, for example, the series we did on the evidence for the Exodus. Well, it's 9 episodes long now. So if we had tried to do that in one video, we're looking at something on the border of 5 hours. We're not gonna do that to people. We're not gifted cinematographers. Doing a documentary that's 5 hours long and still retain people's attention at the end of 5 hours, really tough to do. It's a lot easier to break it up into parts. So that's part of why we do things the way we do, and it's a formula that we've come up with for dealing with the backlog of information we have. So I'm so thankful you're getting something from this channel. We love answering your questions. We get so many questions a day, we actually can't even answer them all, to be honest. Which is why we started doing these live streams, is because we got so many questions that all I was doing was answering questions, and I never could get to actually creating content. So we have made the content here a priority, and we reserve our questions mostly for these live streams. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. L'chaim to you too, and have a happy new year. Okay, let's see here. That's it for the super chat. So let's see about a couple of non-super chats. I'm going to take this one here. Someone the person. Was there any presence of Greeks inhabiting or trading with Egyptians before the Hellenization of Egypt? Yes, there was. The Greeks established the trading colony of Naucratis in the 7th century BC. This colony there was established just for the purposes of trade. It is a Greek colony. It's 4 centuries before the 3 centuries before Hellenization of Egypt under Alexander and Ptolemy the First. So, yes, Greeks were already trading with the Egyptians as far back as the 7th century BC. There's also some indication too that that Egypt had some sort of trading relationship with the Greeks as early as, say, Dynasty 20. There are some indications that Ramses III had some dealings with the Greeks. And we do find some scarabs scattered all over, say, the Mediterranean. So we find scarabs on some Greek islands at certain archaeological digs, which I can't name off the top of my head. We also find, interestingly enough, a few scarabs of unknown provenance, or unknown king. We don't know exactly but they were found on actually as far as, say, the Atlantic coast of Spain. So the trading relationships seem to be going quite far. One of the things we have to kind of understand of the ancient world is the trading relationships are much, much more extensive than we probably realize. There was a recent article that talked about the technology of Assyrian armor being used in northwest China. So that's one heck of a leap, where you go from, say, the 8th century BC Asher to into northwest China. So there was some sort of trade relationship going on there that we're still not quite sure about what exactly it involved, but it was there. For example, we also find we find cloves in the sarcophagus of King Tut. He's in the 1330s, down to, say, the 1320s. 14th century BC, and he's got this spice that was an import from India, essentially. So there's trading relationships going on. Ramses III. There's evidence that he got silk. Silk would have been an import from China. So there's evidence that there was a vast, expansive trading networks. We're still learning, though, how vast and how expansive and how far back it goes. So absolutely, there was trade with the Greeks before Hellenization in Egypt. Anyway, thank you for the question. I hope that answered your question. Okay, let's see. What else have we got here? Oh, I see you double dipped on that question. Don't do that again, please. Okay. Let's see here. Question. I'll take that one. Okay. Cambrit. In Numbers 31:17, why were the males not spared along with the women who tempted the Israelites during the war with Midian? Was it because of fear of retaliation? All right, let's look at that passage. So Numbers 31:17. 31 and 17. All right. Now, I'm going to start at verse 16. Behold, these caused the sons of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the matter of Peor. So plague was among the congregation of the Lord. Now, therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known man intimately. But all the girls who have not known man intimately, spare for yourselves. Okay. What we're talking about here is vendetta, essentially. Now, if you are at all aware of the way sort of revenge happens in feudal or clan-based societies, you're all too aware that children often avenge their parents. Okay, there's a Japanese tale. I believe it's the tale of Genji, but don't quote me on this, where a Japanese warlord comes and slaughters everyone but the children. He spares the male children. And the children grow up and avenge their parents, killing the warlord. So these are very, very common tales in ancient history. So everyone back then was aware that if you kill someone's parents and you didn't kill the kids, they would come back and exact retribution. So there's also here the notion too that the idea that the women who were spared were not those who had known the men intimately. The idea also is that the ones that had not known the men intimately weren't also, had say no skin in that game to seek revenge. So even that was a possibility, that women back then could seek revenge and commit murder and do exact blood revenge, as it were. So that's what's going on here, is that they're sort of eliminating the sin, but they're also eliminating the possibility here of future problems. And it's not pretty, but it's also not a civilized society. It's a society of vendettas and as I said, revenge and seeking after your father's blood. So there wasn't any live and let live back then, and we have to be very, very honest about that. It was a different world with different ethics, very different ethics, and some of those involved, taking another life. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for a life. So, and that's the limit. Be honest. When we see that, for example, in the Pentateuch, where it says an eye for an eye, blood, tooth for a tooth, life for life, that's the maximal limit. You see, the way revenge often worked in the ancient Near East is if you kill a man by accident, his brother will wipe out your entire family. You take out somebody's eye, he whacks off your hands. There was this sort of not just a parity of blow, but an escalation of blows. This led to some really, really messy clan warfare. Really, really messy clan warfare. Yeah, and it would go across generations, and even centuries later. Like the Hivite scheme to kill Jacob and his brothers and take all his stuff, or Jacob and all his sons and take all his stuff, is remembered even when the Israelites come back into the promised land during the conquest. So, that's a 350-year vendetta. But that's the way it worked back then. That was clan warfare. So, anyway, that's what's going on in the text there, and that gives you a bit of the context for what's happening too. So anyway, thank you for the question. Interesting question. I think we just had a super chat. We did. Awesome. Okay, Vic M. For 20 Canadian. Thank you very much. Happy New Year. Well, Happy New Year to you too. Who are your top 5 favorite Egyptologists, and what are your favorite works by them? Ooh. Well, okay. Um, I am very biased here. Very, very biased. Um, One of my favorite Egyptologists has to be Kenneth Kitchen. Kenneth Kitchen. I was his research assistant for 3 years. Uh, I learned much of what I know today from him. Just sitting and observing him. Uh, his work, I always use his reference works, which are like uh, the Ramesside Kitchen's Ramesside inscriptions is an invaluable reference work, absolutely invaluable reference work. If you're an Egyptologist, you can't do without it. But there's other many talented Egyptologists too. So Mark Lehner, I think his work on pyramids has been excellent, absolutely excellent. Barry Kemp is very good too, especially his Theban mapping project. Awesome, awesome piece of work. He was supposed to put out the Theban mapping project as a published encyclopedia, atlas. Yeah, he was going to publish it as a hardbound atlas, and I don't know if he ever did. He did a first edition atlas that sold out pretty much immediately. You can't get copies of that for love or money. His second edition was online, attempted to do it online, and it kept breaking and always had problems. Then he said he was going to do a third edition of a hardbound, and I hope he does because it is fantastic. Um, Others I like too. David Wilkinson's very good. He's a very good Egyptologist. Um, let's see who else. There's many I respect, like James Hoffmeyer, Glenn Godenhoe, Stephen Snape, Mark Collier. You know, uh, as I said, there's a lot of really great Egyptologists. Manfred Beetalk. Manfred Beetalk. There's number 5 if you want. Sort of my list of top 5 there. Manfred Beetalk's work at Avaris was just tremendous. It was groundbreaking. Um, Absolutely groundbreaking. So, anyway, that's sort of my list of say really really great Egyptologists. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Glad you could join us tonight, and have a very very happy New Year too, and God bless you. Okay. I'll take this one. This is actually Archie Strategy. Are you planning on doing a special video in November 2022 for the 100th years since the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb? I wasn't, but it's a great idea. I think that's absolutely a fabulous idea. Because the discovery of King Tut really changed how we view Egyptology and how we view archaeology, and even changed how we view biblical archaeology. It really was a game changer. Absolutely was a game changer. So yeah, it would be really worthwhile to do a video just on that. Go through various things that were found there. What the tomb looks like, how it was structured, why it remained undiscovered for so long. Even that's an interesting story. What Howard Carter did to find the tomb, also very interesting. It was essentially the last place he looked. So, there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened there. What happened to King Tut's tomb, after it was sealed, because it even has a story after it was sealed. So, yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. I think that's a very, very excellent idea. So, we'll look into planning something for November 2022 on Tut's tomb. I think that'd be great. So, anyway, thank you for the question. It's a great question and good idea. Hey, take this one here. Winsburg Sandbox. Is there any possibility that the Torah was originally written in the Egyptian language, possibly hieroglyphs, and was later translated into Hebrew? Okay. I don't think so. I don't think so. And one of the reasons why is because the structure of the syntax. One of the things about Egyptian languages has a very distinct syntax. Your main clause is generally at the beginning, followed by subordinate clauses. You can tell when something is often translated from Egyptian because that sort of syntax remains in the translator's version, in the translated version. So you always sort of get this idea that, you know, it was a red car driving down the street, following the bicycle, going after the dump truck, seeing it beside of the road. You know, that's how Egyptian syntax works, is it starts with an independent clause and it just tacks on subordinate clauses after it, and in these long strings. So it's a very unusual syntax. When I look at Hebrew does not, like the Torah, does not seem to copy that syntax. Now, it copies a lot of words from Egyptian. There's a lot of Egyptian words in the Torah. But there's not a lot of syntax from Egyptian in the Torah, at least not that I've noticed. I might have to take another look at it, but the syntax we find in Hebrew does seem to be very much more Semitic. Much, much more Semitic. So my thought is it was probably written in an early alphabetic script, and frankly, at this point, there's more than enough evidence to suggest that the early alphabetic script existed as early as the early Bronze Age. Roughly 2300 BC, I believe, is what Christopher Rolston dated the Tuma Umalmara was. So, yeah, early Bronze Age is really now what we're going to be. So now that we have say alphabetic writing going back that far, I think it's highly likely now that that the Torah was originally written in an alphabetic script, not in hieroglyph. But that said, it still has Egyptian words, and I think that's pretty darn cool. That's really darn cool. So, anyway, thank you for the question. Great question. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? The person says Singaporean here. Awesome. Welcome. Okay. Hear that Matthew Craig is from Northern Ireland? Excellent. Wow. Fantastic. RG Strategy. Where is Mr. Conjecture? As soon as he finished filming, fame just went to his head. He became like Alec Baldwin, a complete egomaniac. Now he's trying to set up a publicity tour. He went to a vacation off in the Bahamas. Can't control the guy. He's become a complete egomaniac. A little fame, just boom, went to his head. I'm sure he'll be back, but he's on vacation right now. So that's where Mr. Conjecture is. Let's see here. Huh? Swift C has a question. All right. Let's see here. Swift C. Ah. Okay. Swiftly has had a question. Um, how did teenagers used to act and behave in the ancient Near East, like adults? Were they like us Zoomers? No. Or were they different? Okay. Now, unlike say a lot of other cultures that didn't actually recognize childhood as a say a valid stage of life, or as a distinct stage of life, you do have in Egypt this sort of distinction between children and teenagers, and teenagers were adults. They were considered adults. So you had males would wear say a side lock, that when they hit puberty, they would be shaved off and then they would go clean shaven. Now, young daughters didn't have the side lock; they were just always clean shaven. So part of it was the reason why being clean shaven was on your head, being shaving off all your hair on your head was as a lice control. Okay, but that's sort of the marker we kind of have for say children to teenagers is that sort of shaving of the side lock. Now, were how they behaved. Teenagers back then had adult responsibilities. If they were on a farm, they farmed. If they were of the upper class, they were often sent to the Kof, which is a scribal school. It's a school that scribes and nobility were trained to read, write. They were trained in multiple languages. Like, for example, if you were trained as a scribe in ancient Egypt, you'd start off as a fairly young child. You'd start off as a fairly young child, and you'd learn to read and write Egyptian, all forms of it. You would be taught how Akkadian, because that was the diplomatic language of the day. So even if you were, say, went to school, school was serious business. School was serious business. Your teacher had the right to hit you with a rod if you didn't study. So, yeah, it was serious stuff. So there wasn't a lot of fooling around back then, and there wasn't a lot of say sports. So as far as we can tell, the Egyptians were not into too much sports, although they did pursue athletic activities and did so as teenagers. That's true. So they would play combat sports. They would practice wrestling. So that was very common. And the Egyptian form of wrestling is not like Western or Greco-Roman wrestling. It's more like jujitsu. In almost every way, it's more like jujitsu. Throws, falls, um, um, bone breaking. It was kind of brutal. It was kind of brutal. So so we don't have much other indication of essentially that they were more like Zoomers, but we do get sort of the sense that from from the older generation do try to impart their wisdom to the younger generation, so that they prosper and do well and live a good life. So there is this sort of perception that the young can be foolish, but the young also had very adult responsibilities also. So anyway, thank you for the question. Interesting question. Okay. All right, lost in victory. There's another question here that's being pointed out to me. Uh, I'm trying to find it. Can I find it? Yeah, that one. That I see. I see the question. I'm going to recognize the question. I'm probably going to have to answer I don't know on this one. Lost in Victory. Is there anything in Egyptology that sheds light on the lion men of Moab? 2 Samuel 23:20. The lion-like men in 2 Samuel derives from Ariel. So I'm just going to take a look at that. Just a look at that passage, but I don't. Nothing springs to mind immediately about that. 23 and 20. The verse says, Then Benaniah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel, who had done mighty deeds, killed the two sons of Ariel of Moab. Ariel, okay, lioness of El. That's what Ariel means. So he also went down and killed a lion in the middle of a pit on a snowy day. Okay, so there is in this passage, say, a juxtaposing of, say, the name Ariel with Benaniah killing a lion, on an actual lion, on the same day. Okay, or maybe not the same day, but on a snowy day. So he's basically being touted as a brave man. I don't know of anything that's exactly like this in Egyptology. Actually, I take that back. I do know of something that's like it. Which is an epithet for the king. Like, for example, at the Battle of Kadesh, when Ramses II fights the Hittites, and he's all surrounded, and Amun-Re, shines upon him, and he starts to fight like Montu, like a lion. The king uses the term lion to describe himself as a person who's fighting. So yes, there is a parallel there. We also find that the symbol of the lion is found a lot on say, Egyptian thrones. So if you look at the side of the throne of an Egyptian throne, you'll see a royal sphinx, but you'll also see a lion there. And you'll even see on, say, the feet of the throne are carved in the form of lion paws. Okay? So, yes, absolutely. There's a suggestion here that Benaniah here is a guy who kills, foreign royalty, essentially. He kills the sons of the lioness of God. Okay, the lioness of El. So there's that, and then he also goes and kills another lion. So Benaniah is a lion killer. He's essentially the tough, the mightier than kings lion killer. So that's what you're supposed to get out of this. Interestingly enough, the very next passage he says, and he killed an Egyptian, an impressive man. Now, the Egyptian had a spear in his hand, but when he went down to him with a club and snatched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Okay? So, this is a guy who you don't want to mess with. Benaniah is not a guy you want to mess with. He's, he can kill you quickly. He can kill you very quickly. And he's strong, and he's done mighty things. So, that's sort of the takeaway here, I would say, from this. But now that you jog the memory a bit, yeah, we do find it in referenced in royal inscriptions. especially royal inscriptions. That's where you see it. You don't see it in any other place in Egypt other than royal inscriptions. So, so anyway, it's a good question. Thank you very much. So, we are getting to. We'll probably go a little longer, and then we'll call it a night. Here, because let's see here. Oh, I had scrolled way off course here for that, so let's see what else is there. I'm not going to answer that. Here. Warrior of the Most High. I'll take that one. Warrior of the Most High. Have you ever tried to write a fictional story or novel? Yes. Yes, I have. I've written several novels. None of them terribly good. Here's the thing. I do, from time to time, pick up the pen and I do write fiction. I enjoy writing fiction. I think fiction is a blast. But yes, I do write fiction. I try not to mix my fiction and my nonfiction, though. So I'm try to be very, very careful about that. So I do write. I'm a very creative person. I grew up in a creative family. So writing poetry, songwriting, painting, ceramics, jewelry making, sock puppets. So yes, I'm very creative. I have do a lot of creative stuff. So for me, writing fiction is just another outlet for doing that. And I would like to. There is a book that I have been working on that I'd like to sort of bring to fruition eventually on this, but it's sort of been on the back burner to some of my other projects. So I don't know when I'll get back to it. But I have written novels. I have written several novel-length works, and someday I hope to actually write a good one. So anyway, thank you for the question. Very much appreciate it. Okay. I'll take a couple more questions, and then we'll probably call it a night, because I think we're pretty much at the end of this. So I think we've almost answered everyone's questions that I'm going to answer. So let's see here. Anything else here? So let's see. And we'll take this one. Matthew Craig. Did the Egyptians have an eschatology? Yes, they did have an eschatology of a sword. Now, we have to be careful of the word eschatology. Eschatology can mean two things. Eschatology can mean what is the what was their idea of life after death. The other eschatology is sort of there's inaugurated eschatology. That's what happens to you when you die, or versus say final eschatology, what happens at the end of days. Okay. Now, when it comes to Egyptian eschatology, they didn't really have an end of days eschatology. So there's nothing like the Book of Revelation in Egyptian myth. That you don't find that. But they did have the former eschatology of what happens after you die. They did believe that after death, you go through this process of apotheosis, where you're basically, your soul becomes transformed into a godlike form if it happened to survive the trials of the duat, or the underworld. If you survive all the trials of the underworld and you become deified, at least in body and bone. You would then spend the rest of your eternity working the fields in the 12th section of the Duat, the underworld, where if you were a farmer, you become a farmer forever. If you're a scribe, you are a scribe forever. If you're a king, well, you lucked out. You're a king forever. So they do believe that once you sort of pass through the underworld, your eternity is exactly your lot as it is today. So, yes, the Egyptians believed that the world was everlasting. They believed in eternity. And they believed in that the world, heaven and earth, will never end. So that's their final eschatology, is that there is no final eschatology. It's just forever. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. It's a good question. I don't get that one very often. So there you go. Thank you very much. Okay, and we are almost at the end here, so I think that might even be the last question. Well, there's a few more at the end here, so we'll take that because we do have a little bit of time left. So, Chow Yi asks, Genesis 34 or 46:34 mentions that all the shepherds were abominations to Egyptians. Correct. Egyptians did not like goat herders. They did not like goat herders one bit. They were generally foreigners and Semites. Native Egyptians raised cattle. Cattle were a lot easier on waterways. So it was often seen that Semites would come, raise their sheep and their goats, and pollute waterways when they did this. So there was quite a bit of animosity between shepherds and Egyptians. And the question goes on, was shepherding an occupation dominated or associated with the Levantines? Yes, it was. Absolutely was. Levantines raised sheep and goats. Egyptians raised cows. Was this an example of Egyptian xenophobia? Absolutely. Yeah, it's one of the examples. But you have other examples of Egyptian xenophobia too, like, for example, the blocks at the Amarna temple, after it was abandoned, had the faces of the Levantines hacked out, while the faces of the Nubians remained intact. So there was some bad blood between Egyptians and Levantines. Now, we don't know exactly when it was hacked out. It could have been hacked out, as late as the Ramesside period. It would have had to have been hacked out after Amarna was abandoned and, say, before the Ramesside period. But yeah, there's some potential there there was some bad blood. There were also border controls that limited the number of Levantine Semites that were allowed into Egypt. And for a while, say, for example, during the reign of Ahmose the First up until Tutmosis the Third, Levantines weren't actually allowed into Egypt. They had to sort of sneak in through the back corridor to get there, because a border patrol could catch them and sort of drive them out. So absolutely, there was lots of Egyptian xenophobia to go around there. So anyway, thank you for the question. Very interesting question. And we have another super chat from Vic M. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. For $5 Canadian. Thank you so much. What are the earliest ancient Egyptian archaeological finds outside of the ancient Near East? That's a tough one. That's really hard to say for a few reasons. Because the ancient Near East is kind of broad in its scope. So for example, you do find scarabs in Greece. Those are ancient Egyptian finds that are not necessarily in the ancient Near East. They're in Europe, technically. So you do find that. You also find, say, there's an Egyptian fortress at El Alamein. You know, yeah, it's still technically Egypt, but it's almost into the African side, the Libyan side of it. So that's sort of a borderline case. So we also, I mean, the fact is that we do find, say, for example, another thing we find is the letters, some cuneiform letters from Ramses II that was recovered in Turkey that had been written to the Hittite emperor um, at the consummation of, say, the treaty between the Egyptians and the Hittites. Those are 19th dynasty, and they're found in Turkey. So now, is Turkey ancient Near East or is it Europe? Kind of borderline. But we don't find much beyond that. So apart from, say, what we find in, say Spain and oh, I think I believe we find a few artifacts also in Carthage too, but there isn't really all that much outside of the ancient Near East, honestly, because while we do understand that there were big trading networks going on there, what they were trading for, we don't know yet. So it's an interesting question, but I don't think there's a lot right now outside of the ancient Near East that that's from Egypt itself. Just little bits here and there, mostly scarabs, to be honest. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat, and have a great new year. Okay, and I'm going to take one final question, and non-super chat question, and then we're going to call it a night. Alrighty, and if you've asked that question before, again, I would ask that only ask your question once, because we are trying to really enforce the ask once question policy, because it is just too confusing. So I do really ask that you just ask it once. If I don't answer it, you're free to ask it again the next live stream. But I don't take every question, and I don't take all questions. Some questions I actually intentionally exclude too, because sometimes to answer a question would violate YouTube's community standards, and I'm not going to risk that. So I've got reasons for picking the questions I do. Sometimes it's just there's other questions that I find more interesting. So I do love an interesting question. So let's see what else here. I will take this one. Just huh? Does Sean Horton have a $10 super chat? See that or not? Right on our VIX, and it did not show up there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start and restart this, and maybe it will pick it up. Yeah, it didn't catch that. Twidget. Okay, sorry about that, Sean. Yeah, Twidget is great. It does allow me to do these sort of things with OBS, but it doesn't always pick up all the super chats, which is really unfortunate. Okay, so thank you very much for the super chat for $10. We really appreciate it. Okay, how does knowing that a story follows an ancient pattern, for example, patriarch stories in Genesis following the ancestor epic pattern, affect the interpretation? Okay. Now, when we talk about, say, the patterns of, say, patriarch stories following the, say, ancestor epic patterns, we're talking here about archetypes. Essentially, that people follow that there's a say a mythohistory going on here. Now, what's mythohistory? it's an attempt to clarify the term myth. The problem with the term myth is it's vague, really too vague. A myth can be anything from a story that's mostly true, that's received some reception history, to something that's been idealized but has a true core in it, to something that's complete fiction. Mythohistory is trying to say that a story is mostly true but has maybe elements of reception history, or integrates other sources that sound very similar, say other mythical sources that sound similar are being used in, say, a poetic or prophetic manner. So that's what we mean by mythohistory here. So when we look at, say a story that follows a pattern, we have to recognize a couple things. Okay, the first thing is, just because something follows a pattern doesn't mean it isn't true. Schlieman's Troy is probably the famous example here. People since Aristotle's time have been saying that the Trojan War was a myth and there's no such thing as Troy. Well, we get to, say, Schliemann, and he discovers the city of Troy. So there was a true war that had happened there. The Greeks invariably won it. But, there were parts of this that were, subjected to, say, poeticizing, integration with mythological constructs, such as dealings with divine beings. So there are mythohistorical, patterns that are often superimposed upon something that's an entirely true narrative. So when we look at, say, matters of interpretation, we're not necessarily trying to sort out here what's fiction versus what's nonfiction. I think that's a wrong use of those patterns. I think what we're trying to do here is to try to understand the narrative as or the poetry as the ancient person tried to understand it. So essentially, we're going to try to take a text on its own terms. As Christians, I think that's the responsible thing to do with the Bible, is to take the Bible and try to interpret it the way that the ancient writer would have understood it, on the terms the Bible itself presents. I think one of the big mistakes, and this goes both ways. This is not just, say, critical atheist scholars, but it's also, say, Christian fundamentalists too. Is we tend to very often come to the Bible with our own ideas of what the text should say. Ideas that we may have learned in Sunday school or learned off of some bulletin board somewhere. We aren't necessarily coming to the Bible with the right cognitive framework. Now, I think being able to recognize those patterns can be very, very helpful, and be very, very helpful for understanding the biblical text. But we have to be careful too not to infer too much from it, because one of the things that interpreting a pattern does not actually necessitate a conclusion. It just tells us a little bit more about the data. So just because, for example, say the Moses basket narrative sounds a lot like the basket narrative of Sargon of Akkad, doesn't necessarily mean that the one borrowed from the other, or even that if one was an archetype of the other, that it's necessarily a kind of say plagiarism, or even that one's fictional as a result. So we have to be careful not to go to, say, wrong conclusions when we see these patterns. Now, knowing that the patterns are there can actually be very helpful. Let's say in the case of Moses, there's a couple of ways that that pattern could be, easily, reconciled. I mean, one, it's the river cultures. What do you do with an unwanted child or a child you are forced to give up? In the case of Sargon Akkad, it's an Aditum priestess who would be killed and her child killed because she's done an abomination. She's abominated herself by having relations while she's taking this Naditum vow. In the case of the Moses narrative, Moses' child has gotten so big and starting to cry and make noise, and neighbors are noticing. So everyone's life is now at risk. So they have to, set. I mean, they don't chuck Moses' basket down the river like Sargon's is. Moses is placed in against reeds, so it's not going anywhere. It's in the rushes, and his sister is off, at a bank somewhere, looking at it to make sure nothing happens to it. Okay, so it's not even quite the same story here. So the pattern isn't quite the same. But even if we just take that pattern and say, okay, what do we do with just the whole idea of baskets in the reeds? We look at the pattern of a baby in the basket, and let's say it is something like Sargon, a reference to Sargon of Akkad, great warrior, great leader. Maybe it is something, taken from that myth to hype it up. But it isn't the only option either. That's one of the other problems with the whole pattern thing, is sometimes we see the one pattern and we miss the other. And Exodus 2 is a great example of this. Because people will look at that bad baby in the basket and go, "Oh, well, this is an obvious ripoff of Sargon," without recognizing the other pattern there, which is Moses is put in a basket of suf reeds, okay, and then the basket is placed among the suf reeds, and then finally, when the Exodus happens, the people pass through the Yam Suf, Sea of Reeds. It's alliteration. It's a pattern of alliteration. It's a pattern that's essentially the basket scene is foreshadowing the parting of the waters and of the Sea of Reeds. That's what it's there for. It's a foreshadowing. So there might be some reception history here, but it's a reception history that's foreshadowing the later narrative. It's to give you just a small hint of what is to come. One miraculous event amongst the reeds leading to another miraculous event amongst the reeds. So there are very, very much here patterns. But again, we have to, they can help us interpret, especially if we can recognize them all, or as many as we can. But we also can't have target fixation either. Because sometimes target fixation causes us to jump to false conclusions. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I hope you have a very happy new year. And I look forward to seeing you again, friend, in 2022. So I think that is going to be the last question we take for the night. Anyway, I want to thank everyone who's joined us tonight. We really, really enjoy taking your questions. And we wanted to make sure we got one last live stream in before we called it a year. So we, again, thank everyone who donated super chats tonight. We want to thank our subscribers. Again, the people who subscribe and watch our content. really help us out too. Want to thank those who support us on Patreon. You do help us to upgrade and get new equipment and get better equipment and hopefully help to improve the quality of these videos. So with that said, I want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. I want to wish you all the best for 2022. And I want to thank you all, and I'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Good night.